Morning. Oh, good morning, everyone. Welcome on a Super Sunday. There is some kind of football game going on today. Of course, we are an inclusive church. Everybody is not able to do anything to not be inclusive, but it's all right to take a stand. Although we know most people are rooting for the underdog today, a few of us are rooting for the overdog. One more time.
Martin Luther.
Martin Luther. Well, it'll be a fun game, we hope, and the best team win and nobody get hurt. And that's all we really hope for. So,
We really hope the Chiefs.
but we really, Norma said, we really hope our own team wins. Welcome to Contemporary Issues class. Thank you for such a good turnout today. And we are going to talk today about a book. It's okay. About a book that's by an author I really like, Dr. Francis Collins. A lot of us are familiar with him from his work with the National Institutes of Health. And this is kind of a follow-on last week when Ron presented on Anthony Fauci. This fellow, Francis Collins, is kind of the other side of the leading America during the COVID program. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but really about wisdom and truth and why he feels people today feel much more comfortable with challenging science, settled truths, and why that is and the problems that come from it. So I want your input on this today too. But before we start, our usual announcement, Zoomers, nice to have you here. Please mute yourself on the lower left corner of your screen when you're not speaking, and we are recording this for future playback. And please be kind in your discussion and comments about political issues this morning. We are once again wading into those waters, and we ask you to be kind in your comments about both sides. And any other announcements? Oh, Ron has a little announcement about something we're doing here in class.
Oh, yeah, we've got a small bookshelf over here. It says Contemporary Issues Class Books and Other. And I'll highlight a couple today. There's the movie with Sidney Poitier, Separate but Equal.
Very good.
There's a movie called Spotlight that deals with the Boston Globe's investigation of the Catholic Church's issues. Some other books, but if you want to borrow it, just fill out the little info here, take it, bring it back in a few weeks.
Thanks.
Good idea. Okay. Any other announcements? Anyone want to plug any classes or programs going on at the moment? There's always a lot going on here. Okay, if not, we will jump right in. Yes,
I
Jane.
was just gonna say, there's a class that meets twice a month called Parenting and Beyond.
Parenting and
And
Beyond.
they're people from young age with little kids to teenagers and their problems and situations. Well, today they had a panel and they asked us to come and three other couples, various stages in their lives. Kids are in various ages.
Neat.
So it's very good. So if you know someone, that would benefit from that kind of class, you can get in touch with Carly and she'll, give you the information.
Okay.
It was interesting for us to see how things changed.
That's good. That's the new class for parents of children.
Anywhere from
Different
little
ages.
ones to teenagers. It's in that range.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That I will jump right in here and start.
Never get over
The
being.
road to wisdom on truth, science, faith, and trust. He wades into a lot of these things, Francis Collins. And here's a picture of the author. If you're not familiar with this grandfatherly looking fella, He looks like a nice face and he seems like a very reasoned, smart doctor. Just a little about him. He is an American physician and scientist who discovered the genes associated with a number of diseases, including cystic fibrosis, as a geneticist. He served then as the director of the National Institutes of Health and served under 3 presidents. He has written books on science, medicine, and religion, including The Language of God. A scientist presents evidence for beliefs. He founded and served also as president of a group that promotes discussion on science and religion, how you can believe in both and they can be reconciled. In 2009, Pope Benedict appointed him to a pontifical Academy of Sciences. So he's appreciated across Catholic and Protestant levels. By graduate school, he considered himself an agnostic, but a conversation with a hospital patient about religion caused him to question his agnostic beliefs. He started investigating various faiths. He familiarized himself with evidence for and against God in cosmology and other avenues. And then a Methodist minister used the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis as a foundation to develop, to introduce Collins to those views. And he believes that people cannot be converted to Christianity by reason and argument alone, but you have to also take that final leap of faith. And he talks about that in his books. So if you've ever watched him on YouTube, you might want to call up a YouTube and watch him discuss religious topics. He's very balanced and fair to both sides, appreciates agnostics and atheists still and enjoys debating them too. Okay, wisdom. He says, this book is my attempt to describe wisdom. He says, I think that recently politics have warped our thinking about truth, science, and even faith, and it has had an impact on all those areas. Wisdom comes from Greek philosophy, and the word Sophia means wisdom in Greek. And then he says, he also quotes Proverbs 4:6, saying, do not forsake wisdom, and then she will protect you. If you love her, she will watch over you and help you with your life. But what does wisdom mean? It's not the same as knowledge. Knowledge is, as an example, is what was valued by Mr. Spock of the Star Trek episodes. He was the epitome of knowledge and rationality. Going further was Yoda from the Star Wars shows. He went even further by representing wisdom as incorporating emotional expressiveness, judgment about complex matters that have no simple answers, and reflecting on the deeper meaning of things, using knowledge to go beyond just knowledge's sake. So that's what he's after here. Okay. Mentioned that. I want to tell you a little bit about his journey into the DNA world. He says, I emerged from medical school as a physician and scientist, and I was amazed at the beautiful molecule that encodes our biological information, the DNA. This is a DNA instruction book. Each DNA has 3 billion letters of code with 4 letters in its alphabet, and provides all the biological information necessary to build you and me from a single cell. That fact continues to leave me in complete awe and is why I began the study of it. He says, I started studying the subtle misspellings in this instruction book that caused human illnesses, making it possible to provide accurate diagnosis and treatment strategies in the future much better than we can today. A A gratifying early success of his was in 1989 when he identified the genetic cause of cystic fibrosis. He then went on to say we needed to extend this approach to the whole genetic composition that humans have, and that's when he and others put together the Human Genome Project, which intended to map all of the genes in the human genome. It was quite an undertaking, yes. And here's a picture of an electron microscope picture of DNA that, even though it says that's the closest we can see, maybe it's not actually accurate, but that shows how they're lined up left to right horizontally on the DNA. He says, I moved to the NIH in 1993 and began assembling the teams that were putting together the Genome Project. It involved 20 laboratories in 6 countries, and a decade later, the reference DNA full sequence was in hand, ahead of schedule, under budget, and freely available to all around the world. We learned that all humans are part of one family, derived from a common set of Black ancestors who descended from Africa and began to migrate out of Africa 60,000 years ago. This leads me to believe there is no biological justification for racism at all. With further development of technology, we were able to show that cancer and other diseases happen when individual cells are broken and undergo mutations. Diabetes, arthritis, and others have new targeted therapies because of the Genome Project. This first genome sequence took a decade and cost $400 million to put together. Now your individual genome can be sequenced in 24 hours at a cost of less than $500. Future developments will help doctors take your specific genome and target therapies to your specific condition. So we're obviously not there yet, but this was a very important step. When COVID came about in 2020, he was one that put together the teams. He says, I organized and led a partnership called the Therapeutic Intervention and Vaccine Program in 2020. Along with many others, I worked 100-hour weeks for most of 2020 and 2021 to find the answers. This unprecedented scientific response led to some amazing achievements, most notably the development and rigorous testing of the COVID vaccines in just 11 months. There had never previously been a vaccine developed in less than 5 years. But because of the mRNA basis for the COVID vaccine, the mRNA had been studied for 25 years, and that's what enabled the fast development of the COVID vaccine.
That's what copies the code from one cell to another.
Copies the code from one cell to another.
DNA is the blueprint, but there has to be a copy made of the blueprint before the cell replicates or becomes 2 cells. And mRNA takes the information from the blueprint, the DNA, over to the new cell. And they all kind of line up according to that A, T, G, and C.
Very good. Collins says the FDA at that time set the threshold for approval of a vaccine at 50% efficiency, which is what flu vaccines achieve generally every year. My colleague Tony Facci and I frequently discussed our hopes for the outcome might be 70%, and then we could consider that success. As the results came in late November 2020, for both the vaccines, I guess there were 2 mRNA, there was 90 to 95% efficiency in preventing illness that caused respiratory symptoms and close to 100% in preventing severe disease and deaths. He says this was a moment of profound relief and awe for us. As I gathered our groups and spoke to them about the results, I could not hold back tears. He said, I think future historians will judge the development of the mRNA vaccines in record times as one of the greatest medical achievements in medical history, in human history.
Let me throw in a note from this morning's paper. A lot of the federal money has augmented university research in medicine.
Yeah.
And there was an article in this morning's paper saying that they're talking about cutting dramatically federal funding on a lot of university medical research, particularly to support instruments like electron microscopes, things like that, that are much needed for that research. So here's another area where making cuts or not making cuts is going to have profound effects.
Yeah.
And check the Denver Post for that article.
Collins says that despite that success of vaccines being so efficient in their testing, says within a few months of the emergency approval, public skepticism of vaccines began to appear in greater volume than we had ever seen before about vaccines. Ultimately, more than 50 million adults declined the vaccine, even after the shots were widely available at no cost, as we remember. Political party, in my opinion, he says, was a strong predictor of resistance, but so was religion, especially with white evangelical Christians, my own group, he considers. The most resistant of all. Public distrust, we've now determined, is driven by social media, cable news, politics, politicians, and a myriad of concerns by people who now believe they have the expertise to question issues on themselves rather than depending on expert analysis. Some of the concerns, and we'll remember this, was COVID-19 real? Or was it some kind of conspiracy by the government for some reason? Was it serious?
A million people dead.
She's said a lot
Was it really
of
serious? Some people said. Was the vaccines rushed too fast? And that was, we'll talk about that a little bit more. The side effects were hidden by the government or other medical people, and whether the mRNA would alter the recipient's genome, which because was driven by people not understanding the process and the kind of a natural questioning. There were more outlandish conspiracies, but no need to go into all those, but these were the main concerns that people had. But the consequences of the misinformation and the questions were tragic. More than 230,000 Americans died within 1 year from June 2021 to 22 because misinformation made them turn away. He says, we are in serious trouble when we believe that our faith or our politics requires us to distrust science, when others believe that political allegiances are a better source of wisdom than truth, faith, or science. There are temptations greater today to put politics above truth, and I'm not sure how we turn that around.
Amen.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think about that? Any thoughts on that so far?
But we have so many sources of information coming to people, disinformation. We don't have a Walter Cronkite trust.
Yes, Gene.
Trust. And for that reason, the information explosion, I think Steve has contributed greatly to this. Who can you trust as far as a spokesperson?
Mhm. All of that. Colin says, but we did make mistakes as, especially in communicating what we were doing at the time. But he says, but when I speak to audiences that are skeptical now, I ask them to remember the circumstances in the spring of 2020. The CDC and the rest of the government was in deep crisis mode. trying to figure out how to respond to this. Trucks were parked outside hospital morgues and filled with dead bodies that there was no place to put.
I remember that.
There was little time for substantial engagement with communities and local health departments, let alone to explain the decisions in detail to the public. We felt compelled to take strong action quickly to flatten the curve of the thousands of COVID deaths that were occurring every day and overwhelming the hospitals. It was a priority of ours to stop the overwhelm of the hospitals at that time. The vast majority of experts agreed at that time that limiting indoor interpersonal interactions was critical to slow the viral spread. And the evidence supported that recommendation and still does, at least in that part. But without question, the restrictions carried a lot of pain. It was the closing of schools and businesses that stirred especially anger and resistance across the country. But he said our communication was not as good as it could have been to explain the nature of our understanding and how we were reacting. We should have said we're doing the very best we can based on the current evidence, and the information is changing, even sometimes week to week, on what we thought was the best reaction to what was going on. For example, we didn't know at first that asymptomatic people could be infectious, and we didn't expect the emergence of variants so quickly. But true wisdom comes not just from knowing what experts know, but also from their admissions and talking about not having all the answers, but doing the best job that we could. So he's in this book expressing that they could have done better, but what led people to not trust us as the experts in doing the best job that we could at the time? And so that's what the rest of his book is about. He says, how did we get here? The polarized dynamic of our politics and our media is, in his opinion, what set up the whole scenario for the COVID resistance. He says the polarized dynamic had been rising for years before 2020, but it really exploded with the pandemic, and that's what drove it. These divisions spilled over into influencing our personal medical decisions in the midst of this public health crisis, leaving good, honest people whipsawed by a barrage of misinformation, partisan politics, and some authority figures seeming to distrust experts and institutions, exactly at the time when we were trying to cultivate confidence in our experts. This time, the culture wars were literally killing hundreds of thousands of Americans, and we couldn't figure out how to stop that from happening. This also showed up in traditional institutions such as churches, mosques, and synagogues. He said the decline of church attendance, the civility breakdown that's led us to retreat into media bubbles, the defensiveness of our positions instead of seeking evidence and reason to arrive at truth. A shift in both political parties toward the extremes, which amplify the animosity and the divisions, has also been a factor.
You know, Steve, sometimes trying to dig out the truth is really, really hard because you've got it coming from all directions and you don't know what really is true. And I bet a lot of these people during COVID felt the same way. I believe in science and truth, but if you're receiving input from all different groups, you don't know what to believe. And if it's somebody that you trust that's telling you something that's wrong, how do you, sort through that?
As Pontius Pilate said to Jesus, what is truth?
There you go.
Go back to that one.
Verse in Jeremiah that says, why halt ye between two opinions?
Why halt ye between two
It's
opinions?
in the book of Jeremiah.
Very good.
Didn't know that, did you?
No, that's a good one.
Look it up.
That's a good one. Colin says, he says that, that's a good segue, actually, Alice. He says, we're all trying to figure out today what sources we use to believe and how to decide truth. He says that, but has the entire nation really moved away from truth in science and faith? Or is it just the extreme voices that are really getting the attention and causing the disruption? He says, our contentious politics don't really reflect the true attitude of the majority of people. A group called More in Common has studied this issue of how many people are actually on the extreme sides of each party, the progressive activists on the left and the conservatives on the right. And this group came out with a finding that there is 67% of people in the middle, and they call them the exhausted middle. They do not, this 67% do not align themselves with the extreme views, and they are troubled by the national divisiveness. So there are actually three Americas: the red, the blue, and the tired. I don't know how they came up with 67%, but it sounds reasonable. And I want to throw out a question here for a second that wasn't in the book, but I've heard some people say, is our American culture of individualism a contributor to our divisiveness and our lack of trust in experts today? We say, I'll decide for myself and work for myself and my own happiness, and not necessarily for the good of the nations. Whereas Asian cultures are different. They are much more quick to get behind national policy.
It's the 2-year-old in all of us. Don't tell me what to do.
Yes,
In the Japanese culture, there's a saying that if the nail stands up, it'll be pounded down.
nail stands up, it will be pounded down.
That's not good.
Okay, okay, the next chapter in his book is on what is truth. He looks at this from a scientific point of view. So I have a little handout here. And I hope, Susan, you can see the concentric circle graphic on there. Okay. Colin says, let's first look at what we consider to be real truth. He calls it necessary truth. That's the very center of the concentric circles. And he says that is an example of mathematics. 2 + 2 = 4. You can't disagree with that. There is such a consensus and repeated evidence that nobody really disagrees with that. And he says, from that, let's go to the next concentric ring. That's called uncertainty. Yes, uncertainties.
No.
No, firmly established. Right, sorry. Firmly established fact. These are those that scientists have repeatedly done experiments on and had repeated same results. And so it's supported by evidence and observation. Gravity and the earth is round. There really should be no
But there is a society that opposes the earth is round.
Yeah.
One of
Flather.
our science teachers went to the convention in Denver about 6 years ago, and he says he was so angry he wanted to punch somebody out.
But what got introduced in the last several years is the concept of alternative facts.
We're gonna get to that. Yep, we're gonna get to that, Tom. Right, he mentions that. The third ring then is uncertainty. Theories that seem to make sense but are still under research. There are insufficient evidence. And one of the major ones today among scientists, he says, is dark matter and dark energy. There's something, there are parts of the universe that don't make sense unless there is something called dark matter and dark energy taking up the space between so much else. And they are pretty certain about it, but they just don't have the evidence to conclude decisively yet. So that is,
That's a
still considered a theory.
that's an explanation for why the universe is not just expanding, it's expanding and accelerating in its expansion. And so the theory is, where is this energy coming from? That's caused, because normally things slow down as gravity controls our universe. It's not slowing down, it's expanding and accelerating.
At different rates.
And that's why that's where dark matter theory came in. We only see 5% of the universe. There's 95% is dark.
The opposite of uncertainty seems what science is pursuing, a quest for certainty. Even though there's a margin of error, which allows the opposition to science to say, well, that's not necessarily true.
And that's what they do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Well, some of these other things
And-
weren't true either before, now they are. So you just look for hope that people will realize, as we find out more things in science, that things will change and they will become firmly established facts or necessary truth. It
No,
just
it'll
takes
fall the other
time,
way,
it's
Judy.
And he does address that too. I think I'll cover that in just a minute, talking about in the future, science can change in the future, but in making our decisions today, we are best served by sticking with the firmly established facts as we know them today. And of course, the last ring here is opinion, such as dogs are better than cats. So obviously, it's subjective. And college or either one. Vicky says she doesn't prefer either one. But Colin says we really have to teach people in high school and elsewhere the types of truths that we recognize today. Solid evidence, firm facts, theories, and opinion. People don't pay attention to those categories. Yes, Jeff.
Just wondering if, so the world, I've heard about the folks that believe the world's flat and stuff. They've kind of made what firmly
I didn't hear
established
that.
fact a opinion. And they've said, my opinion is the world is flat. They have no evidence, or they may not have much evidence, but it seems like there's a movement of things from the necessary truth and firmly established out to the edges of uncertainty and opinion. Does he talk about that, or is that am I looking at this in a rational way?
Yes, he does talk about that a little bit. Yeah. And says we have to try to understand how people like that see things so differently. He doesn't really offer a solution to that, but
He doesn't see vaccines. She has 7 kids, and none of them were vaccinated. And they got sick with COVID, and they still didn't think they needed the vaccine. And so they just said, no, we don't believe that. We think vaccines are harmful. And it's like, how does this happen?
another good transition here. 11:07, just a new time check here. Let me just run through this quickly. He mentions the history, different periods we have of questioning truth, what we've considered truth. In the early ancient days, there were oral myths and stories passed down by generations, of course, and people believed the stories because they were told by authority figures and elders of their tribes. Jewish tradition then developed with questioning stories, that it was all right to question stories. And that became a cultural practice of in the synagogues of debating the meaning of the ancient texts and stories. And that was encouraged. Like Jesus said, you've heard it said such and such, but I say to you, my interpretation and understanding is this way. So he modeled that it was okay to question and apply new interpretations. In 1700s, the European movement, the Enlightenment, and the scientific revolutions came out. Scientists did experiments and measured the planet's movements and other proposed theories that contradicted the biblical accounts. And then scientific method developed of testing theories to get repeatable results. So that was a new time. Then in the 1950s, Collins says, in academic communities, universities, A postmodern movement became very popular that said, all our prior ideas of truth are contaminated by our own history, culture, and experience and should not really be trusted. We've been contaminated by our own experience. This became all the rage in the 1980s sociology departments, and they even said there is no objective truth. What we consider true is just an agreement by social consent. It's just something that we agree on as ideas.
Even though
Then-
they've been proven with the scientific.
Right. Right, but apparently in the academic community, this was very popular.
Soft science.
This idea then began,
I said, even though they've been proven with the scientific method, over and over and over again, there's still,
Mhm.
yeah.
Then this idea began to creep into the areas of science and history, saying that even settled truths like gravity and genetics are not to be trusted because they may change. Science does change as we learn more in successive generations.
Like Jane said.
But this is not how science today is understood. Natural laws are an objective reality. But it doesn't mean, and I thought this was an interesting way he phrased it, this doesn't mean that scientists assert they've arrived at the final truth. For example, Newton's laws have been shown to break down in the extremes of quantum mechanics.
Yep.
But they are still considered in the zone of firmly established truth at this time. And that's what we should understand. And the final phase of questioning, truth was in 2017 when your phrase alternative facts was brought up by the counselor to Mr. Trump, Kellyanne Conway, during an interview, and she said that the attendance numbers at Donald Trump's first inauguration were the largest ever by the alternative facts that we have. And the interviewer, Chuck Todd, said, wait a minute. He said, alternative facts means not facts, they're falsehoods. That's how he responded. So, but that was his reply. And I thought an interesting way that Collins showed the progression of questioning truth and how we go through. 6 types of untruth that he reveals in Collins' opinion. Number 1 is ignorance. It's just not having the correct information. Number 2 is falsehood, telling incorrect information, but maybe not intentionally. You're just repeating something you've heard. Number 3, lies, telling incorrect information intentionally for some purpose. Number 4, delusion, speaking from a mental illness or simply thinking, yes, or simply thinking you have competence to understand a complicated situation when you really don't have that ability. That I thought was genius. Say that
Delusion to people in this world.
applies to all of us at some time or another. And pardon my French on number 5, but he calls this bullshit. This is what the word Collins used. He said, that is saying something to make an impression with no interest in the actual facts. It's worse than lying because a liar at least usually knows the truth. Most product advertising fits into this. They do not care if it's true or not.
So don't pay attention to.
So don't pay attention to the BS.
Example number 5 is, will DEI influence the air traffic controllers?
That could be one. And then number 6, on the highest level, propaganda, a massive increase of lies and distortion with a political intent.
Think.
Yes, very good. Okay, I think that's all I have.
You
For
prove
that.
that. To get to the truth. It's different.
Yes, yes. Had you,
Repetition.
repetition,
Repeating his lies so often
yes.
that it's just in your brain.
Huh?
Why repeat it all? He makes stuff up every day.
What do you think of those categories? Have we thought about those categories very often?
Delusion. Yep.
Delusion, I think, was very insightful. and kind of at the heart of what's going on. So many of us think we can do our own research on medical conditions or something on the internet makes us the expert. And we're not, we don't have the competency to understand a complicated situation. Gene?
Most of our attention on the cultural wars have been with respect to biological and medical science. This question is also pointed to Ron. It's very disturbing. What you gave us in the way of information on cutbacks on medical science at the University of Wisconsin. I don't hear the pushback, Ron, on space exploration and funding in that area of science. In other words, are we somewhat schizoid with respect to we will fund in this area, but not fund in that area? That means we'll have science in that area. How do you separate that? Is that happening in space science? Do you see the same threat happening in space science as in medical science?
That's a whole lecture. Not as bad as it is in space exploration. Doesn't seem to be quite as political as some of the other areas.
Is that because of the cultural nature of American society that we don't want to be outpaced by China or Russia? Therefore, we have to be in the race to succeed, to be first. Make America great again, to be first. Is that a cultural thing, do you think?
I think you make a good point because when we found out that China was ahead of us in AI, the stock market dropped 400 points.
What Goebbels, Hitler's advisor, said that if you repeat a lie often enough,
Yes.
people believe it.
Yes.
That's
Very good. I want to give our Zoomers a chance to comment or question without feeling like they're interrupting us at all. Anybody have a thought on anything so far? Doug or Joe or Susan? It's okay. When you do, just jump in. The next section. Yes, go ahead, Frank.
What I've recently been asking people is, what do you want to believe? What do you want to believe?
What do you want to believe?
And what I hope to hear from them, that I rarely hear from people, is the truth. And I, to this crowd here, if you came up with the response, the truth, God bless you.
what do you want to believe?
Funds presented in this class about the
Psychological immune system.
psychological immune system that defends vigorously any change when proposed to us because we want to defend our current beliefs. Yes, Deb.
Accountability, diplomacy, in our democracy of executive, judicial, and congressional legislative support, and holding our president accountable to his behavior of bad rhetoric.
Accountable to truth, telling the truth.
It's like he's just dominating, like you say, on all these social platforms over and over again. My grandmother was a reference librarian in East Chicago. And I remember when the computers came out, the internet, she was afraid because she says, well, who's going to validate the credible sources? The reference librarian always did. And so, right, and then now who validates those credible sources? Because anything can be posted without credibility.
Yes,
Factual check.
Tucker Carlson.
yes, absolutely. Another good segue into our next chapter. He says, what has happened to the media today as a credible source for learning truth? He says, hyperbole on both sides has become the order of the day, meaning exaggeration. He says it has blurred the boundaries between reporting and opinion. He says, even on settled issues today, that many of the media present the extreme views as giving equal time. But if the topic is one where there is essentially a settled science conclusion based on evidence, then providing fringe voices with equal time does more harm than good.
Yep.
It devalues the truth as we can determine it. Nonetheless, we still see news programs that present debunked views as another possible opinion. that is okay to accept. The news media has contributed to the decay in much more serious ways, and so has social media, excuse me. Social media, which some scientists call anti-social media, now permeates society, proving ruinous to the emotional health of children and the trust of Americans in their institutions. Facebook started out as a benign way to bring people together, to connect people who had lost track of each other and were reconnected, and it was doing a public service with that. But unregulated websites soon emerged, and Facebook followed with not fact-checking much that was on there. Even these places were quickly filled with pornography, inflammatory and racist and conspiratorial comments without providing any checks or balances. While the depravity of the dark web was obvious, the somewhat more respectable sites like Facebook, excuse me, were trying to develop their own revenue streams without regard to the cost of society and the respect for truth. These private or state-sponsored forces learn to quickly exploit the vulnerabilities in people's desire to believe in conspiracy theories and ignore the truth. What's the answer? He says, would it be congressional regulation? We don't know, but something has to be done to bring truth back to our media today. It's been, as a result of this, it's been hard for political moderates to be elected anywhere, in part due to gerrymandering as well as other practices. Candidates today seem to feel as they have to take relatively extreme positions in order to get enough base to be elected on either side that they are running on. If truth doesn't matter anymore as a political goal, what is the future of America? Why is it acceptable to be a politician today and say anything that will get you elected? What do we do in a circumstance where someone's putting forward information that is clearly untrue? This is an issue we need to address as a country. Politicians today are in fact doubling down on untruths. When they are called out by some in the media, they simply double down and repeat the lies until people believe it with an intentional political gain. The conspiracy for many people provides a new version of the truth, namely that a secret organization or individual is causing trouble. This provides a framework for understanding that is very compelling to people who are confused and want a clear answer to something that cannot be figured out easily.
I remember that. There was a police officer in my small town in Iowa. He would sit in the alley and run radar. I'd always see the glow of his cigarette out the window. And I'd go over and talk to him, and he talked about the John Birch Society, the Council of Foreign Relations, and how they were engineering this end of our culture, the John Birch Society. He went on and on and on about their beliefs.
Driving fast enough.
I want to bring up something that affects many people this week in this class. So I see Don Dutter, so I see the Galloways. USAID has been essentially shut off, the judges. But we got a letter from Project Cure saying they needed some extra funds because USAID part had been slashed and they needed help. And I know there's many people in this church. The Galloways, do you have
Project Cure?
somebody working in USA or is it somebody else?
Foreign Service.
Foreign Service, okay. But essentially, some are saying, well, there's imperfections and there's leakage in foreign aid. And in other words, not all of it is getting to where it's intended. But because of this, we should just throw out the baby with the dirty bathwater. Just cut it all. And it's having devastating effects on things like Project Cure. Project Cure, as Don will attest, and there's several other people in this church that
Tom
have
Schultz.
volunteered.
Yeah, the Schultz.
Every week,
Yeah,
Project Cure.
okay. And there's those that are saying a high percentage of the organizations receiving US aid are corrupt and evil.
Doctors Without.
And that got me so mad on Facebook, debating with somebody. To dare say Project Cure was, evil or corrupt or, yeah,
Well, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
yeah,
Because there are certain questionable things that they have done that were brought up even in Peg Noonan's Wall Street Journal opinion piece yesterday. She pointed out all these other things that we may not support. And they're not able to differentiate between the good things and these other questionable things where they're teaching people in Honduras, alternative rights or something like that. They're not differentiating between the good and the bad, is
Yeah.
throw it out, just
Yeah.
close it down.
Ron,
okay,
One thing that struck me, Ron, before we leave that,
yeah.
was the total budget
Yeah.
for that cut
Yeah, less than 1%.
was how much of the money that Elon Musk raised during the same time.
Yeah.
It was about, I think, I don't recall exactly, but it was about 1/3 or 1/4 of what he gained during the time.
Yeah,
Ron, we were on a Zoom on Monday evening,
Oh, yeah.
on Monday evening with Peace Corps volunteers and returned Peace Corps volunteers from around the world. There were 1,000 of us on the Zoom conference. And we heard from Peace Corps volunteers who are currently in their duty stations. And the instantaneous halt that action with USA put on Peace Corps projects that are going on, that are vital to human life, vital to human welfare, vital to the respect for and the sense of community that Peace Corps volunteers have built within these third world nations all over the globe. And I would say there was a great deal of frustration voiced, of course. But there was a great deal of call to action. In our small little world of that 1,000 people and maybe 75 or 80,000 current people who are involved in the Peace Corps. Not a huge imprint, but there were people on that call from our age on down to that 21-year-old who's trying to lift people up by their bootstraps, either through education or through agriculture or through health issues all over the world. And that's the thing that was never considered. How many lives are affected? How many lives are lost because of brash actions?
Well, he also talked about the fact that the USA person there in the embassy that had been kicked out. All the things that they had to go through to prove that these projects are worthwhile and the money's going to the right places, being invested in the right situations. And it's just piece after piece after piece that they have to follow.
And it does not go to the governments. That is one fact that, I have heard as a falsehood that USA money does not, it goes to organizations rather than to governments. So it's not being misused by governments in these various countries. It's being used for people.
Well, regardless of whether it is or isn't, name one organization that doesn't have a little corruption associated with it.
That's right.
And a sharpshooter with a rifle can pick and choose his targets if he's making a case against.
You'll never be able to build a foreign aid system that is totally immune from any corruption or leakage. But you can get the number so high that the good
Outweigh.
So far.
10 orders of magnitude more than the leakage. Same thing with social security. There's some money, there's some crooks out there getting social security checks that should, and they should be weeded out, but you don't dynamite the social security system because there's a couple, some leakage.
Okay, we've got just a few minutes left, 4 minutes left.
Just going to, excuse me, I just wanted
Go
to
ahead,
say
Jane.
to the comment you made. Trump's answer is, oh, it's too complex to do that kind of thing. To just wipe it out. He said that, you know, about a number of things already. Oh, it's just too much work, it's too much, like,
He doesn't like to read.
or think.
All right, a couple of final thoughts here on global warming. Is Dr. Collins' thought on global warming? He says that recent surveys of scientists across the world show between 98 and 100% of scientists agree that climate change is happening, and the main cause is human activity. And the reason for that is the increasing the temperature since 1950 in the industrialization of the world has been much faster than it has been in any other time of history. He says this is essentially settled science, in my opinion. Skepticism is a good thing to question scientists, but also it's a good thing to accept those who have studied for years and have more expertise than you do in deciding what is going on in a complicated situation.
The changes in the world would take thousands of years, but now because human impact, it changes it a lot.
That's what he's saying. The last 50 years, the temperature's gone up so much, so quickly, there's no question that scientists say it's because of carbon and human activity. One last thing, he kind of finishes the book saying, let me tell you why I'm a believer in a personal God. He says, I believe from my research that science points to a creator. He says, the most influential thing to me was the simple, even beautiful mathematical representations in the physical laws. He says, the universe is so precisely tuned to be the way it is and for life to emerge that something had to happen after the Big Bang. Something had to be behind the Big Bang, in his opinion. He said it's this knife edge fine tuning allows for a fascinating universe that seemingly couldn't create itself. The weak nuclear forces, the mass of the electron are all precisely where they need to be for life to be formed. We either believe there is a creator or there was infinite universes, and we just happen to be on the one that out of all of the infinite universes where life could emerge. This couldn't be just luck, in my opinion. Even the atheist Stephen Hawking said, the remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers have been so precisely adjusted to make possible the development of life that it's incredible. Either the parameters were set by a creator or there is an infinite number of alternative universes with different values for these constants. That was his opinion and what swayed him.
He was the
To
first
believe.
scientist that I listened to and heard speak in Harrisonburg, Virginia, who presented this third option. Because there'd always been this false dichotomy. You have to believe in evolution or creation, but you can't believe in both. Collins says, yes, you can.
Very good. Any final thoughts? We're about out of time. Go forth with wisdom. Believe in truth. Thank you for coming today. Hope to see you next week. Go Chiefs. My thanks.
Yeah.